Anna, before we complete the weather briefing, I would like to go over one important item: fuel status reporting. There was some confusion recently in another crew about when to declare minimum fuel and when to escalate to a fuel emergency. Let us make sure we are clear on that.
Yes, Jeff, I would appreciate that. I understand the general concept, but I am not completely sure about the specific thresholds and what they mean in terms of flight time remaining.
Good. Let us start with minimum fuel. When we report minimum fuel to air traffic control, we are not in an emergency situation. What we are saying is we have just enough fuel to reach the destination and land with the required final reserve fuel, but we cannot accept any additional delay. No holding, no rerouting, no vectors that extend our flight time.
So, minimum fuel is not an emergency, but it is a clear indication that we are operating at the limit of our fuel planning margins.
Exactly. It is an advisory to air traffic control, but it does not entitle us to priority. And we must not assume that air traffic control will change anything for us. We are simply stating that from this point on, any delay may require us to reevaluate our routing or destination, or, in the worst case, lead to a situation where we would land below final reserve fuel.
Understood. And what exactly does final reserve fuel mean, based on the regulatory fuel policy as defined in our company operations manual?
Final reserve fuel, according to the legally required fuel policy for commercial turbine aircraft, is the amount of fuel that allows the aircraft to hold for 30 minutes at 1,500 feet above the aerodrome elevation in standard conditions. This definition applies to turbine-engined aircraft. For aircraft with reciprocating engines, this duration is 45 minutes. This fuel is intended for holding only and does not include approach, landing, or go-around maneuvers. These provisions are aligned with the regulatory fuel policy, as reflected in both our Operations Manual Part A and the detailed fuel planning tables in Part B.
So final reserve fuel is not intended to be used for diversion or as part of planned manoeuvring. It must remain available as a legal buffer, and if used during final approach or landing, this must only occur after a proper fuel emergency declaration. It is not a resource to be planned upon. It is a regulatory safeguard legally reserved for unforeseen circumstances.
Correct. Final reserve fuel is a legal buffer. Once we know we will land with less than that amount, or we have no realistic way to avoid doing so, we must declare a fuel emergency.
And the correct phraseology would then be,
you would declare on the active frequency, Mayday, 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 fuel. That clearly indicates we are no longer compliant with the fuel requirements and that priority handling is now mandatory.
But to be clear, even at that point, the aircraft is still flying normally. The approach is safe and we are in full control. It is just that we will land below the final reserve fuel.
Exactly. Declaring a fuel emergency does not mean the flight is unsafe. It means the regulatory fuel margin has been compromised. The situation is still under control, but we are no longer operating within the prescribed limits, and that must be reported.
That helps. Now, what about in-flight fuel replanning? Could we, in certain cases, for example, due to better than forecast weather or available airports, reclassify alternate fuel as en route fuel or divert for uplift?
Yes, absolutely. As long as we are still within fuel planning limits, we may revise our strategy. The regulations allow for operational flexibility, especially when conditions change in flight. That may include diverting to a suitable airport, updating our alternate, or using alternate fuel as additional en route fuel, provided all planning criteria remain satisfied.
So, a minimum fuel report is a communication, not a limitation.
Exactly. It is a clear signal to air traffic control that we do not have room for unexpected delays, but it does not restrict our ability to manage the flight safely and legally, including changing our destination if needed before the final reserve fuel is compromised. While dispatcher input and air traffic control coordination are essential, operational control rests entirely with the commander in commercial operations, or the pilot in command in non-commercial operations. That is exactly why we monitor remaining fuel against required fuel throughout the entire flight.
Thank you, Jeff. This is one of those topics that deserves real attention in the briefing.
Always. Fuel margins are not just numbers. They are decisions in the making.